What if everything you thought you knew about the gods and goddesses of ancient times was just the surface of something far stranger? Beneath the familiar myths and legends lie stories so mysterious, so utterly bewildering, that they've left historians and archaeologists scratching their heads for centuries. These aren't just tales of powerful beings, they're riddles wrapped in enigmas, echoing across millennia with questions that still haunt us today. Picture this: a world where deities didn't just command the skies or the seas, but seemed to interact with humanity in ways that defy logic. From sudden disappearances to cryptic messages etched in stone, the ancients left behind clues that suggest these figures were more than mythological constructs. They were entities wrapped in layers of secrets. Why did so many cultures, separated by vast distances and time, describe eerily similar divine encounters? How could stories from the banks of the Nile to the jungles of Mesoamerica share such uncanny parallels? The deeper you dig, the clearer it becomes something extraordinary was happening, and we've only begun to uncover it. That's where our journey begins. Over the next 25 enigmatic stories, we'll peel back the veil on these ancient mysteries, one astonishing revelation at a time. We'll explore deities who vanished without a trace, civilizations that worshipped beings with impossible knowledge, and artifacts that shouldn't exist yet do. This isn't just about retelling old myths, it's about confronting the unsettling, the unexplained, and the downright bizarre. By the end, you might just question whether these were ever mere stories at all. Ready to step into the shadows of history, let's begin. Among the most baffling disappearances in ancient mythology is the vanishing of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god who once stood at the heart of Aztec civilization. Unlike other deities whose stories end in triumph or tragedy, Quetzalcoatl's tale takes a sudden, inexplicable turn. He simply vanishes, leaving behind a prophecy that would haunt an empire. According to legend, this wise and benevolent god, who taught humanity the arts of agriculture, medicine, and astronomy, pledged to return one day in a specific year under specific signs. But when that year arrived, it wasn't Quetzalcoatl who appeared, it was Hernan Cortés and his Spanish conquistadors. The uncanny timing has fueled speculation for centuries. Could the Aztecs have misinterpreted their own prophecy, or was there something more at play? Some scholars argue that Quetzalcoatl's return was always symbolic, tied to cycles of time and renewal. Others suggest the legend evolved through centuries of retelling, blurring the lines between myth and historical expectation. But the most chilling theory: that Cortés' arrival was no coincidence, that the Aztec priests, clinging to ancient predictions, saw the bearded, light-skinned invaders as divine fulfillments of the prophecy, sealing their own downfall. What's undeniable is the eerie precision of the timing, and the lingering question if Quetzalcoatl wasn't truly gone but waiting. What else might the Aztecs have known that we've yet to uncover? The ruins of Tenochtitlan whisper with unfinished stories, and the feathered serpent's silence remains one of history's greatest riddles. Now, let's journey from the Aztec Empire to the banks of the Nile, where another ancient enigma unfolds, the tale of Horus and his missing eye, a story steeped in magic, betrayal, and cosmic balance. Unlike Quetzalcoatl's disappearance, this myth centers on a single, cryptic object, the Eye of Horus, an emblem so powerful it became synonymous with healing and protection across ancient Egypt. The story begins with a brutal conflict between Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship, and his uncle Set, the chaotic god of storms and violence. In their climactic battle for the throne of Egypt, Set tears out Horus' left eye, shattering it into fragments. But here's where the myth takes a startling turn. The eye isn't merely lost, it's magically restored by Thoth, the god of wisdom, who scours the land to piece it back together. This act isn't just about physical healing, it's a metaphor for wholeness itself, a cosmic mending of order over chaos. The restored eye, known as the Wadjet, became one of Egypt's most sacred symbols. It wasn't just a divine relic, it was a blueprint for harmony believed to hold mathematical precision. The fractions used by Thoth to reconstruct the eye mirrored the exact measurements Egyptians applied in architecture, medicine, and even their calendar. But the deeper mystery, why did this symbol appear repeatedly in healing rituals, tucked into bandages of the sick or carved into temple walls? Some researchers argue the eye's geometry held hidden knowledge, a code for regeneration passed down by the gods. Others suggest it was a psychological anchor, a reminder that even the gods endured suffering and emerged whole. The most haunting question, though, isn't about the eye's symbolism, it's about its origins. Similar symbols appear in distant cultures, from the all-seeing eye of Mesopotamia to Hindu third-eye iconography. Was this mere coincidence or evidence of something far older, a shared understanding of divine vision lost to time? When archaeologists unearthed amulets of the Wadjet in places it shouldn't have reached, the puzzle only deepened. Perhaps the Eye of Horus wasn't just a myth. Perhaps it was a key, one we're still learning how to turn. Power in ancient Egypt wasn't just about strength or dominion, it was woven into the very fabric of names. And no name held more weight than the true, secret name of Ra, the sun god who commanded creation itself. This wasn't just a title, it was the source of his divine authority, hidden away like a key to the universe. But secrets, no matter how well guarded, have a way of surfacing, especially when a goddess as cunning as Isis sets her sights on them. The tale begins with Ra, aged and weary, his once radiant power flickering like the sunset. As he walked the earth, saliva dripped from his mouth, mingling with the soil. From this unlikely union sprang Isis, a goddess of magic and strategy, who recognized opportunity where others saw only decay. She knew Ra's true name wasn't just a word, it was the heartbeat of his power, and she resolved to claim it. But how does one steal a secret from a god who'd hidden it even from himself? Isis' scheme was as brilliant as it was ruthless. She gathered the dust that bore Ra's spittle, mixed it with clay, and shaped it into a venomous serpent, a creature so potent, even the sun god couldn't withstand its bite. When the serpent struck, Ra staggered, his immortal flesh burning with a pain no deity had ever known. The gods gathered in panic, but their remedies failed. Only Isis offered hope, whispering that she could heal him if he revealed his true name. Ra resisted at first, reciting a litany of titles. I am Khepri at dawn, Autumn at dusk, the maker of mountains, but the poison spread, and with each passing moment his defiance crumbled. Finally, in agony, he surrendered the name, and Isis caught it like a whispered secret. The moment the syllables left his lips, the balance of power shifted forever. This wasn't just a theft, it was a cosmic upheaval. By claiming Ra's name, Isis didn't merely heal him. She wove his essence into her own magic, becoming a force rivaling the sun itself. Some scholars see this as mythic metaphor, the transfer of priestly authority from older solar cults to Isis devotees. Others suggest a darker interpretation, that the story encodes lost rituals, spells to invoke divine power by speaking hidden names. The most tantalizing clue lies in Egypt's temples, where priests performed ceremonies using Ren, the true names of gods, believing utterance could reshape reality. If Ra's name held such power, what others might have been stolen or forgotten? And what does it mean that Isis, a goddess of healing, chose deception to claim it? Perhaps the message isn't about treachery, but necessity, that even gods must evolve, and sometimes the greatest magic begins with a secret reluctantly surrendered. The Vikings didn't just fear the end of the world, they mapped it out in chilling detail, down to the last battle cry and crumbling star. At the heart of their prophecies stood Ragnarök, a doom so precise it reads less like myth and more like a script. But woven into this apocalyptic tapestry are two threads that defy expectations: Odin's grim surrender to fate and Baldur's mysterious return, a paradox that hints at something far stranger than total annihilation. Enter the Völva, the seeress whose visions in the poetic Edda paint Ragnarök with unsettling clarity. She describes a winter that lasts 3 years without summer, brothers turning swords on one another, and the great wolf Fenrir swallowing the sun whole. Yet amidst this chaos, one figure's fate stands out: Odin, the All-Father, who rides to meet Fenrir armed with wisdom, spear, and the knowledge of his own demise. Here's where the prophecy twists. Odin, the god who famously sought knowledge at any cost, who sacrificed an eye for wisdom and hung himself on Yggdrasil for runic secrets, does not fight his destiny. He walks into the wolf's jaws willingly. Why would the master of strategy accept defeat? Some scholars argue this reflects the Norse ideal of facing inevitable doom with courage, what they called drengskappa. Others suggest Odin's submission reveals a darker truth, that even gods are bound by forces beyond their control, but the real enigma lies in what happens next. After the slaughter, after the fires consume Asgard and the sea swallows the earth, the Völva's vision shifts, the waters recede, green shoots push through the ash. And there, standing in the newborn world, is Baldur, the god of light, once killed by Loki's treachery, now alive again. This isn't just resurrection, it's reinvention. Baldur's return implies cycles within cycles, a universe that doesn't end but recalibrates. Ancient carvings in Scandinavia show Baldur's death as a ritual, his body pierced not by mistletoe but by symbols resembling celestial alignments. Could Ragnarök's end actually mirror astronomical events, like the precession of equinoxes or a recurring cosmic winter? The Vikings left no explicit answers, but the parallels are uncanny. More startling are the archaeological clues tying Baldur to rebirth cults across Europe. Amulets depicting a radiant figure, often mistaken for Christ in early Christian-era Scandinavia, bear a striking resemblance to descriptions of Baldur's return. Was his survival a later addition to the myth or evidence of an older belief in cyclical time? The seeress's final words hold the key. She sees a hall brighter than the sun, standing where the old gods fell. If Baldur rises, who else might return? And what does it mean that Norse sagas, carved into runestones centuries ago, insist the end is never truly the end? The Sumerians didn't just worship their gods, they claimed these beings descended from the heavens, lived among them, and then vanished without warning. These were the Anunnaki, a pantheon of deities whose name literally translates to those who from heaven to earth came. But what sets them apart from other ancient gods is the staggering specificity of their departure. According to cuneiform tablets etched over 5,000 years ago, the Anunnaki didn't fade into myth or fall in battle. They boarded something called a mu, described as a celestial chariot, and returned to the stars, leaving behind not just legends, but entire systems of mathematics, astronomy, and law that inexplicably sprung up overnight in Sumer. The sheer precision of these accounts rattles modern scholars. How could a civilization that had just mastered the plow suddenly calculate planetary orbits with pinpoint accuracy? Why do their myths describe the Anunnaki genetically engineering humanity to serve as laborers, a tale eerily reminiscent of modern cloning debates? And most baffling of all, why did their gods need gold, mining it in vast quantities before their exodus? Ancient astronaut theorists point to these inconsistencies as potential evidence of extraterrestrial contact, suggesting the Anunnaki were visitors from another world. Skeptics counter that these are elaborate metaphors for natural phenomena or power struggles between city-states. But one detail resists easy explanation: the sudden appearance of advanced knowledge in a society with no precedent for it. Take the Sumerian king list, a tablet documenting rulers who reigned for tens of thousands of years before a great flood. These aren't just exaggerated lifespans, they're broken into two distinct categories: rulers before the flood, who lived inhumanly long lives, and those after with normal mortal reign. Could this divide mark the moment the Anunnaki left? Even more provocative are the ziggurats, massive step temples mirroring the constellations. some aligned to track celestial events with engineering that shouldn't have existed at the time. The real enigma lies in what the Anunnaki left behind: clay tablets filled with star maps, instructions for building divine weapons, and warnings about a planet called Nibiru, said to orbit our sun every 3,600 years. Mainstream archaeology dismisses these as myth, but then why did Babylonian astronomers centuries later chart a mysterious celestial body matching Nibiru's described path? And why do modern infrared telescopes keep detecting unexplained gravitational anomalies in our solar system's outer reaches? Perhaps the most haunting clue comes from a broken tablet in the British Museum, where a scribe begs the departing Anunnaki to return, writing, "You raised us from darkness, then left us unfinished." It's a sentiment that echoes across millennia, not just as myth but as a plea. If the Anunnaki were mere fiction, why does their absence feel like a wound in Sumerian culture? And if they weren't, what might they have known that we're still struggling to rediscover? The underworld wasn't always a place of isolation, at least not for Ereshkigal, the Babylonian queen of the dead. Her realm, Urkala, was a land of dust and silence where souls wandered as shadows, stripped of memory and desire. Yet one myth shatters this image of eternal solitude, revealing a love story so intense it literally shook the heavens. This is the tale of Ereshkigal and Nergal, a romance born from deception, sealed in passion, and bound to the turning of the seasons, a myth that blurs the line between death and desire. It begins with a feast in the heavenly court where the gods gathered to honor Ereshkigal's sovereignty over the underworld. Unable to leave her domain, she sent her vizier Namta to collect her portion of offerings. But when Nergal, the fiery god of war and pestilence, refused to rise in respect, Ereshkigal demanded his presence not for punishment, but for something far more unexpected. The gods, fearful of her wrath, tricked Nergal into descending to Urkala, arming him with 14 demons to ensure his return. What they didn't anticipate was the instant, electric connection between the two. For 7 days, the Queen of the Dead and the God of Destruction became inseparable, their union so powerful the underworld itself seemed to tremble. Here's where the myth twists. Ancient texts describe their coupling as both literal and symbolic, a merging of opposing forces that mirrored the cycles of nature. Nergal, associated with the scorching summer sun, brought heat to Ereshkigal's cold realm, while she, ruler of the lifeless winter months, tempered his destructive fury. Their passion wasn't just personal, it was cosmic, a dance of decay and renewal etched into the calendar. When Nergal finally fled, breaking free of his demons to return to the upper world, Ereshkigal's grief plunged the land into barrenness until he relented and agreed to rule beside her for half the year. This isn't just a story of love and loss. It's a blueprint for the ancient understanding of seasonal change. Archaeologists have found tablets linking Nergal's departures and returns to solstice rituals, with priests reenacting his journey to ensure crops would rise again. But the deeper mystery lies in the parallels to other myths: Persephone and Hades, Ishtar and Tammuz, as if cultures across continents were encoding the same natural truth in different tongues. Why did the Babylonians place such emphasis on a goddess of death experiencing passion? Perhaps because they understood that even in darkness there's the seed of rebirth. The most haunting artifact isn't a text but a terracotta relief from Nineveh, showing Ereshkigal and Nergal enthroned side by side, their hands nearly touching. Between them sits a baby, a detail absent from most versions of the myth. Could this suggest a lost tradition of the underworld bearing new life? Or is it a metaphor for the fragile hope that even in the bleakest depths, something waits to rise? The answer, like the lovers themselves, remains just out of reach, whispering from the clay tablets of a civilization long gone but never truly forgotten. In Hindu mythology, the gods and demons didn't always battle. Sometimes they worked together for something greater than themselves. The churning of the ocean, or Samudra Manthan, is one of the most extraordinary collaborations in ancient texts, where Devas and Asuras set aside their eternal feud to churn the cosmic ocean itself, seeking the nectar of immortality. But what began as a quest for eternal life quickly became a trial of endurance, wisdom, and survival, revealing treasures and terrors beyond imagination. The gods, weakened by a curse, needed the elixir of immortality to reclaim their strength. The demons, always hungry for power, agreed to help, but only if they could share the prize. To churn the ocean, they used Mount Mandara as a giant stirring rod, wrapping the serpent Vasuki around it like a rope. The Devas held Vasuki's tail, the Asuras his head, and as they pulled, the mountain spun, churning the depths of creation. Yet nothing could have prepared them for what emerged first, not the nectar, but a thick, suffocating poison so potent it threatened to consume the universe. The Halahala poison spread like smoke, searing the air, choking the heavens. Even the gods and demons recoiled, realizing their ambition had unleashed something they couldn't control. Just as despair set in, Shiva, the great destroyer and protector, stepped forward. While others fled, he gathered the poison in his palms and drank it, holding it in his throat to save existence itself. The venom turned his neck blue, earning him the name Nilakantha, the blue-throated one. This act wasn't just heroism, it was a lesson in sacrifice, showing that even the most destructive forces could be harnessed for preservation. Only then did the ocean begin to yield its treasures. One by one, divine objects arose: the wish-fulfilling cow Kamadhenu, the goddess of wine Varuni, the moon that would adorn Shiva's hair, the celestial horse Uchtashravas. Most dazzling of all was Lakshmi, the goddess of prosperity, who chose Vishnu as her consort, blessing the world with abundance. But the moment the nectar finally appeared, the truce shattered. The demons seized the pot, forcing Vishnu to transform into the enchantress Mohini, who tricked them into surrendering it. The Devas drank, sealing their immortality, while the Asuras were left with only rage. The deeper meaning of this myth isn't just about deception or triumph, it's about balance. The churning symbolizes the struggle between opposing forces, divine and demonic, light and shadow, creation and destruction. Even the poison had purpose. Without it, the nectar would never have surfaced. Some scholars see this as an ancient allegory for alchemy, where dangerous processes yield great rewards. Others believe it encodes forgotten rituals where priests symbolically churned sacred waters to invoke blessings. Yet the most haunting question remains: why did the gods and demons cooperate at all? Perhaps because the greatest treasures are knowledge, immortality, prosperity, require not just strength but unity. Even enemies must sometimes turn the wheel together, knowing that what lies beneath the surface could either save or destroy them. The ocean never gives its gifts easily, and neither does the universe. Among the Maya, corn wasn't just a crop. It was the very essence of life itself, woven into their origin story through the dramatic cycle of the maize god's death and rebirth. The Popol Vuh, the sacred text of the Kayich Maya, doesn't merely describe this deity's fate. It paints a visceral, almost cinematic saga of dismemberment, burial, and miraculous resurgence, a metaphor so potent it shaped an entire civilization's understanding of existence. The story begins with the maize god Hun-Hunappu, a radiant figure whose life ends in brutal humiliation. After losing a ball game, a sacred contest tied to cosmic order, to the lords of the underworld, he's decapitated, his head hung in a barren tree as a warning. But here's where the myth defies expectation. The tree, once lifeless, suddenly blossoms, bearing fruit in the shape of the god's skull. When a maiden named Exquic approaches, drawn by the impossible harvest, the skull spits into her hand, impregnating her with hero twins who will later avenge their father. Meanwhile, the maize god's body is buried in the underworld, only to sprout anew, stalks rising from his limbs, roots threading through his bones, as if death itself were fertilizer for rebirth. This isn't just poetry. Archaeologists have uncovered murals at San Bartolo dating back to 100 BC, showing the Maize god's resurrection in vivid color, his body merging with lush vegetation. The message is unmistakable. Life springs from sacrifice, but the deeper mystery lies in how this myth mirrors real-world agricultural rites. Maya farmers practiced milpa cycling, burning fields to enrich the soil, an echo of the god's dismemberment fueling renewal. Even the hero twin's eventual defeat of the underworld lords mirrors the annual triumph of rainy season over drought. What unsettles scholars, though, are the parallels to other global resurrection myths: Osiris in Egypt, Dionysus in Greece, each tied to crops and each featuring dismemberment. Could these stories stem from some primordial human observation of seed burial and sprouting, or is there a stranger thread connecting them? The Popol Vuh hints at an answer, describing the first humans as molded from maize dough, suggesting humanity and corn share a divine blueprint. The most haunting evidence comes from Mayan tombs, where rulers were buried with jade beads resembling corn kernels, their mouths sometimes stuffed with actual maize, a literal incarnation of the god's resurrection. One noble sarcophagus at Palenque shows the deceased falling into the underworld while the maize god rises opposite him, as if death and harvest were two sides of the same leaf. Perhaps the most provocative clue lies in modern genetics. Scientists recently discovered that ancient Mesoamericans selectively bred maize from a wild grass called teosinte over millennia, a process so meticulous it's been called humanity's first feat of genetic engineering. Did the Maya see this transformation as divine intervention? The Popol Vuh's answer is subtle but profound. The gods didn't just create corn, they became it. And in doing so, they offered a promise that even in collapse there's the seed of something new. High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, where the air hummed with something beyond mere wind, the Oracle of Delphi sat atop a three-legged stool, her body trembling as invisible forces seized her voice. This was no ordinary priestess, this was the Pythia, the mouthpiece of Apollo himself, and her prophecies didn't just predict the future, they bent kingdoms to their will. But behind the divine spectacle lay a mystery modern science is only beginning to unravel. What truly caused those frenzied trances, and why did her words, so famously ambiguous, carry such terrifying accuracy? The rituals were as precise as they were eerie. After bathing in the sacred Castalian spring, the Pythia would descend into the temple's inner chamber, the Aditon, where she'd inhale vapors rising from a fissure in the earth. Ancient accounts describe her convulsions, the way her voice deepened as if something else spoke through her, a phenomenon so unsettling that priests stood ready to interpret her ravings into cryptic verse. For centuries, scholars dismissed these details as myth. Then, in the 1990s, geologists discovered something startling. Delphi sits atop two intersecting fault lines where seismic activity could have released ethylene, a sweet-smelling gas known to induce euphoria, hallucinations, and involuntary muscle spasms. Suddenly, the Pythia's trances weren't just spiritual theater, they were chemistry in motion. Yet the gas alone doesn't explain the oracle's uncanny influence. Take the infamous prophecy given to King Croesus of Lydia. If he attacked Persia, he would destroy a great empire. Confident in victory, he marched only to watch his own kingdom crumble. The genius of Delphi's ambiguity was its duality. It wasn't just about being vague, but about revealing truths the listener wasn't ready to hear. The Pythia's words acted like a mirror, reflecting back the ambitions and blind spots of those who sought her counsel. Alexander the Great, upon being told he was invincible, took it as divine endorsement, but later historians noted the oracle never specified for how long. The most haunting clue lies in the temple's ruins. Carved into its walls were the phrases, "Know thyself," and "Nothing in excess," not commands but warnings. The real power of Delphi may not have been in predicting the future, but in exposing the fragility of human judgment. When the Roman Emperor Nero demanded a prophecy, the Pythia allegedly replied, "Your presence here offends the god." It was a rare moment of clarity in centuries of riddles, and it cost her life. By the 4th century AD, as Christianity rose, the oracle fell silent. But the fissure still exists and the gases still seep. If the Pythia's voice was shaped by the earth itself, what other truths might still be waiting, unspoken, beneath those sacred stones? In the quiet before dawn, when shadows stretch longest, the Shinto myths tell of a time the sun itself turned away, not in anger but in grief. Amaterasu, the radiant sun goddess, once retreated into a celestial cave, sealing the entrance with a boulder so immense even the combined strength of 800 kami couldn't budge it. Without her light, the world didn't just dim, it unraveled. Crops withered, rivers froze, and demons crept from the hollows between realms. This wasn't an eclipse or a storm. It was the universe holding its breath, waiting for a goddess who refused to be consoled. The cause of Amaterasu's withdrawal cuts deeper than most divine tantrums. Her brother, the tempestuous storm god Susanoo, had rampaged across her rice fields, hurled a flayed horse into her sacred weaving hall, and in a final act of cruelty, killed one of her handmaidens. But the betrayal wasn't just the violence, it was the violation of trust between celestial siblings. Amaterasu's retreat wasn't punishment, it was heartbreak. And that's what made her return so startling. The gods didn't coax her out with pleas or apologies. They threw a party. Enter Aim no Usium, the goddess of revelry, whose solution to cosmic darkness was a dance so bawdy it shook the heavens. She overturned a tub near the cave's entrance, stomping rhythms onto it like a drum, then shed her robes, spinning and laughing with such abandon that the assembled kami roared with delight. The noise piqued Amaterasu's curiosity just enough for her to crack the boulder's seal. "What joy could exist in a world I've abandoned?" she murmured, peering out. At that moment, the gods thrust a mirror before her, reflecting her own dazzling brilliance. Stunned by her radiance, she hesitated long enough for Aim no Usium to seize her wrist and yank her into the light. The symbolism here is as layered as the ritual still reenacted at Shinto shrines today. The mirror, now enshrined at Ai's grand shrine, represents not vanity but self-recognition, a reminder that light, once withdrawn, must be rediscovered. Aim no Usium's dance, far from mere bawdry, embodied the chaotic vitality that counters despair. Even Susanoo's later repentance carries weight. His gift of the sword kusanagi, pulled from a dragon's tail, became one of Japan's imperial regalia, proving destruction and creation are intertwined. But the most haunting detail lies in the timing. Scholars note this myth's parallels to agricultural cycles, the sun's retreat mirroring winter solstice traditions, the lewd dance echoing fertility, rites meant to coax back the growing season. In some village festivals, priestesses still reenact Aim no Usium's performance, their movements preserving a truth the ancients knew. Sometimes laughter is the only antidote to darkness. And perhaps that's the real lesson. Not that the gods control the light, but that even divinity needs reminding. Joy is what makes the world worth illuminating. Now contrast this with another culture's celestial vanishing act, one where the sun didn't hide willingly but was stolen outright. In Australian Aboriginal lore, the Yolngu people tell of Walu, the sun woman, who daily crosses the sky with her torch of flame. But in the dream time, the mischievous Crow-Wa crept into her camp, seizing the torch while she slept, plunging the land into cold silence. Here, darkness wasn't a goddess's grief but a thief's opportunity. To restore light, the animals had to collaborate. The kookaburra's laughter startled Wa into dropping the torch, the kangaroo caught it midair, and the echidna used its spines to carve the flame into manageable pieces, scattering them across the sky as stars. Two vanishings, two returns, one resolved through raucous celebration, the other through communal cunning. Yet both carry the same warning: light is never guaranteed. It must be fought for, danced for, or when all else fails, stitched back together from whatever fragments remain. Before the clash of swords, before the ravens circled, she appeared, kneeling by the river with bloodied hands, scranging a warrior's shroud in the moonlight. This was the Morrigan, the Celtic phantom washerwoman, but she wasn't just a spectre. She was a harbinger, an omen woven into the very fabric of fate. When the tribes of ancient Ireland heard her keening over the water, they didn't flee in fear. They listened, because her lament wasn't just a warning of death, it was a map of the battlefield's unspoken truths. The Morrigan's presence defied simple classification. She wasn't merely a goddess of war, nor solely a prophetess. She existed in the liminal spaces at fords where worlds crossed, in the mist between breaths before a killing blow. Texts like the Ulster cycle describe her washing the armor of doomed warriors, her hands stained crimson though the water ran clear, but the chilling detail. Those she mourned weren't always doomed yet. Some scholars argue her act wasn't prediction, but intervention, a chance for the fated to change their path if they heeded the sign. This duality echoes in later Banshee legends, where a wailing woman's cry signals impending loss. But where the Banshee mourns passively, the Morrigan participated. In one tale, she tries to seduce the hero Cuchulainn, offering him victory in exchange for loyalty. When he refuses, she transforms into an eel to trip him during combat, then a wolf to startle his enemies, not to kill him but to force his recognition of her power. Her omens weren't just announcements, they were negotiations with destiny itself. Archaeology adds eerie context. Near the River Boyne, where the Morrigan was said to wash shrouds, excavations revealed votive offering swords bent deliberately, shields placed upside down, as if warriors left tributes to sway her visions. Even the river's name, Bone, ties to an older word for white cow, linking the Morrigan to sovereignty and the land's cyclical nature. Death and renewal weren't opposites to her, they were threads in the same tapestry. Modern folklorists note how her image evolved. Medieval Christian scribes demonized her as a witch, but rural communities kept whispering of the Bean Nigh, the little washer by the ford, who'd grant wishes if approached courageously. This shift reveals something profound. The Morrigan was never just about doom. She was about choice. To see her was to stand at a crossroads, to fight blindly toward your fate, or to read the omens and adapt. The most haunting relic isn't a text, but a 1st century carving near County Meath. It shows a hooded figure by water, but the artist left her face unfinished, as if to say her true form isn't stone or spirit, but the chill down your spine when you realize some truths can't be washed away, only faced. The Arctic ice cracked under the kayak's hull as the hunter paddled farther from shore, his harpoon balanced against the wind. But this was no ordinary hunt. Every stroke carried the weight of tradition, every breath a silent plea to the woman beneath the waves. For the Inuit, the sea wasn't just a provider. It was Sedna's domain, a realm ruled by a goddess whose rage could starve entire villages or whose mercy could fill their bellies for months. Her story begins with betrayal, but it doesn't end there. It twists into something far darker, a tale where severed fingers birthed the creatures of the deep, and human survival hinged on remembering the cost. Sedna's myth varies across the frozen north, but the core remains hauntingly consistent. Once a beautiful maiden, she was thrown into the sea by her own father, his knife hacking at her clinging fingers as she grasped the boat's edge. Some say he sacrificed her to save himself from a storm. Others claim he traded her to a mysterious suitor who was really a bird spirit in disguise. Either way, the result was the same. Sedna sank, her mutilated hands transforming into seals, walruses, and whales, her body becoming the ocean's cold heart. Yet this wasn't just a creation story, it was a warning etched in ice. Inuit oral traditions describe Sedna's hair as tangled with the sins of humanity, every broken taboo, every wasted kill, every act of greed matting into her strands until the sea grew restless. Shamans would undertake perilous spirit journeys to comb her hair, soothing her fury so the animals would return. But the most striking detail lies in the hunting rituals themselves. Before eating seal meat, elders would flick water into the animal's mouth, a symbolic offering to its creator. women weren't allowed to sew sealskins near the shore, lest the sound of piercing needles remind Sedna of her wounds. Even the way hunters dispatched their prey mattered. A quick kill honored her, while prolonged suffering risked her vengeance. Archaeological finds along the Arctic coast reveal just how deeply these beliefs were woven into daily life. Excavated harpoon heads show deliberate ritual breaks, as if rendering tools useless to atone for overhunting. Carved amulets depict Sedna with a half-human, half-marine form, her fingers trailing into fish tails. But the most poignant evidence comes from starvation camp sites where communities perished during lean years. Among the bones, researchers found tiny ivory carvings of Sedna, clutched in skeletal hands as if in final apology. What unsettles modern scholars isn't the violence of the myth, but its uncanny ecological wisdom. Sedna's story enforced sustainable hunting long before the concept existed. By linking marine life directly to a goddess's pain, the Inuit created a moral code that prevented overharvesting. When European whalers later ravaged Arctic waters, indigenous hunters warned that Sedna's anger would follow, a prophecy that came true as populations collapsed. Today, as climate change melts the ice, elders whisper that her fury has returned. The seas grow unpredictable, the animals scarce, and somewhere in the depths, a goddess with hands of whalebone and eyes of midnight still watches, waiting to see if humanity remembers the price of her fingers. The skies over ancient Yoruba land didn't just rumble with thunder. They roared with the tempestuous love and fury of two deities whose battles shaped the very fabric of existence. Shango, the god of lightning and justice, wielded his double-headed axe with the precision of a king's verdict, while Oya, goddess of winds and transformation, tore through villages with storms that could rewrite destinies in a single gust. Their clashes weren't mere weather patterns, they were cosmic arguments played out in the heavens, each strike and gale a reflection of human passions, power struggles, and the delicate balance between order and chaos. At the heart of their conflict lay a paradox: they were once lovers, their union as explosive as the elements they commanded. Yoruba oral traditions describe how Shango, the fourth king of Oyo, grew suspicious of Oya's loyalty, accusing her of stealing his secrets. In rage, he cast her out, only to ignite a divine feud that would echo through generations. But this wasn't just a marital spat magnified to mythic proportions. Their battles mirrored real tensions in Yoruba society between kingship and autonomy, between the rigidity of law and the necessity of change. When Shango's thunder cracked the sky, it was the sound of authority asserting itself. When Oya's tornadoes uprooted trees, it was nature's reminder that even the mightiest rulers answer to forces beyond their control. Archaeological digs near Old Oyo reveal artifacts that blur the line between ritual and reality. Charred remains of ancient lightning rods, iron staffs topped with carved axes suggest priests channeled Shango's power during droughts, while cowrie shell belts associated with Oya have been found buried at crossroads, symbolizing her role as a guide through life's upheavals. The most striking find, a 15th-century terracotta pot depicting the two deities back-to-back, their faces half-merged, a visual metaphor for their inseparable yet oppositional natures. What makes their story endure isn't just the drama, but its layered wisdom. Shango's lightning strikes with decisive force, yet Oya's winds scatter the ashes, making room for new growth. Modern Yoruba festivals still reenact their clashes, with dancers clad in red for Shango and swirling purple for Oya, their movements a dialogue of conflict and reconciliation. Elders whisper that when thunder follows a storm, it's not strife, it's conversation. The gods may argue, but they never truly part, and perhaps that's the lesson etched into every lightning scar and wind-carved dune, that even the fiercest battles can birth balance so long as both voices are heard. Deep in the forests of Eastern Europe, where gnarled oaks stand sentinel over forgotten paths, whispers persist of treasures not meant for mortal hands, relics of Perun, the Slavic thunder god whose wrath once shook the very roots of the world. These aren't just stories told around fires, they're directives carved into the land itself, hidden in the way lightning splits ancient trees or how storms gather over certain clearings with unnatural precision. For centuries, locals have spoken of axes buried where thunderbolts struck, of amulets hidden in hollowed trunks, pulsing with the gods' unspent fury. And now, modern treasure hunters armed with metal detectors and old folktales are daring to seek what the gods left behind. One of the most persistent legends centers on Perun's axe, a weapon said to cleave truth from lies when wielded by a worthy hand. Medieval chronicles describe Slavic warriors carrying iron axes into battle, not just as tools but as conduits to the divine. These weren't ordinary weapons, they were forged in rituals, quenched in sacred springs, and etched with symbols now called thunder marks, zigzag patterns mimicking lightning. Archaeologists have unearthed a handful of these axes in Poland and Ukraine, often near the remnants of oak groves, their blades oddly unrusted despite centuries underground. But the chilling detail, every single one was found deliberately broken, as if rendered useless to prevent the unworthy from harnessing their power. Then there are the treasure maps, not drawn on parchment but encoded in folk songs. A Belarusian ballad speaks of 9 oaks standing knee-deep in gold, a riddle that's led seekers to riverbends where the roots of massive trees coil around submerged stones gleaming with pyrite. Others follow the firebird's path, a reference to mythical birds said to nest where Perun's gifts lie hidden. In 2018, a team in the Carpathians claimed to find a cache of silver coins beneath a lightning-scarred oak, arranged in a wheel pattern matching Perun's solar symbols. But when they tried to excavate further, equipment failed inexplicably, and locals warned them to leave before the next storm. They did. The most compelling evidence, though, isn't buried, it's woven into living traditions. In remote villages, farmers still feed old oaks with offerings of bread and honey, especially after storms, as if appeasing something beyond the weather. Ethnographers recorded elders in Serbia performing a ritual where they'd strike the ground with axes during droughts, chanting, "Perun, unlock the sky." Days later, rains often came, coincidence perhaps, but when researchers examined these sites, they found soil anomalies, unnaturally high iron concentrations, magnetic disturbances hinting at something deeper beneath the surface. The real mystery isn't whether the treasures exist, it's why they're guarded so fiercely. Folklore warns that Perun's relics choose their discoverers, and misfortune follows those who take without permission. In 2021, a YouTube treasure hunter vanished near the Bialowieza forest after boasting online about finding a god's hoard. His last video showed an axe head crusted with dirt, its edge gleaming then static, as if the camera had been struck. Authorities found his gear neatly stacked at the base of an oak, the axe head missing. The locals nodded grimly. Some debts, they said, are paid in thunder. What lingers isn't just the thrill of the hunt, but the uneasy question: are these artifacts truly lost or waiting silent and watchful for a moment when the world needs the thunder god's justice once more? Long before the first sunrise warmed the Australian outback, the land lay flat and featureless until the rainbow serpent awoke from its slumber beneath the earth. This wasn't just a creature of myth, it was the architect of the world itself, a being of pure creation and chaos whose every movement reshaped the landscape. As it pushed through the barren soil, its massive body carved valleys where rivers now flow. Where it paused to rest, waterholes bubbled to life, and when it coiled tightly, the pressure formed mountains. But the most astonishing detail, across dozens of Aboriginal nations from the Arnhem Land to the Kimberley, this same serpent appears in stories not as a metaphor, but as a literal force that sculpted the earth, leaving behind fingerprints still visible today. What sets the rainbow serpent apart from other created deities is its duality. It isn't just a benevolent life-giver, its wrath is legendary. When disturbed or disrespected, it summons floods so violent they swallow entire villages. In the Dreamtime narratives of the Yolngu people, The serpent's anger once drowned a group of hunters who ignored tribal laws, transforming them into stone formations that now jut from the sea. But here's the twist: these punishments aren't arbitrary. They're cosmic corrections enforcing the balance between humanity and nature. Modern hydrologists studying northern Australia's river systems have noted something uncanny. The serpent's described paths often align with actual fault lines and water channels, as if the stories encode ancient observations of geological forces. The serpent's shape-shifting abilities deepen the mystery. In some tales, it takes the form of a man to teach sacred rituals. In others, it becomes a rainbow bridging earth and sky. Rock art dating back over 6,000 years depicts the serpent with kangaroo heads, emu feathers, or even human hands, symbolizing its role as a connector of all things. Archaeologists working in Gabonmong found paintings where the serpent's body is a literal map, its curves tracing trade routes and seasonal migration paths. This wasn't just art, it was a living guidebook passed down through generations. The most haunting evidence of the serpent's influence lies in contemporary Aboriginal practices. During monsoons, elders still avoid fishing near certain bends in the Catherine River, warning that the serpent's sleep mustn't be disturbed. In 2019, when a mining company ignored these warnings and dynamited a sacred site near Alice Springs, the resulting flood destroyed their equipment, an event locals attributed to the serpent's vengeance. Scientists dismissed it as bad luck, but the timing was eerie. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between. The rainbow serpent isn't just a relic of the past. It's a reminder that the land remembers, and when pushed too far, it answers. In the beginning, according to Zoroastrian belief, there was only light, pure, radiant, and unbroken. But then came the shadow. Ahriman, the embodiment of darkness, didn't just challenge the divine order, he infected it, weaving corruption into the very fabric of existence. This wasn't a simple battle between good and evil. It was a cosmic war where every human choice became a battleground. Unlike other mythologies where evil lurks in the background, Ahriman stands as an equal and opposite force to Ahura Mazda, the god of wisdom and light. Their struggle isn't temporary, it's the foundation of reality itself. The ancient texts describe Ahriman's first act of defiance with chilling precision. He didn't attack Ahura Mazda directly. Instead, he poisoned creation from within, introducing death to the world, twisting animals into predators and planting lies in the hearts of humans. The eerie brilliance of this myth lies in its psychology. Ahriman doesn't just represent external evil, he symbolizes the doubt, greed, and chaos that whisper to us all. Zoroastrian rituals reflect this duality. Fire temples keep sacred flames burning eternally as a bulwark against darkness, while followers recite prayers to keep the lie at bay, acknowledging that evil isn't just out there, it's a constant internal struggle. Archaeological finds from the Sasanian Empire reveal how deeply this dualism shaped daily life. Silver bowls depict Ahura Mazda and Ahriman locked in an eternal tug of war, their bodies mirrored yet opposite. Excavated ossuaries, bone containers for the dead, show meticulous care to avoid contaminating earth or fire with corpses, which were seen as Ahriman's domain. Even the layout of ancient Persian cities reflects this divide, with fire temples deliberately placed on high ground, as if pushing back the darkness through architecture. What unsettles modern scholars isn't the myth's violence, but its unresolved tension. Most religions promise evil's eventual defeat, but Zoroastrianism offers no easy victory. The prophecies speak of a final battle where Ahriman will be crippled, yet never entirely destroyed. Some texts suggest his essence will linger like smoke in the wind, a perpetual reminder of corruption's persistence. This ambiguity forced believers to confront an uncomfortable truth. Light might triumph, but darkness always remains, shaping the world through its absence as much as its presence. The most haunting evidence of this belief comes from a 1st-century parchment discovered in the Dasht-e-Kavir desert. It describes a priest's vision of the end times where the righteous ascend to glory, but the sky, even in paradise, retains a faint stain like ink spilled in water. Perhaps the lesson isn't about vanquishing evil, but learning to see its fingerprints everywhere and choosing light anyway. Maui had stolen fire from the gods, lassoed the sun to slow its passage, and even fished up islands from the ocean's depths, but none of these feats compared to his boldest scheme yet. The Polynesian trickster god set his sights on the ultimate prize, immortality itself. His plan wasn't just reckless, it was a cosmic gamble that would alter the fate of humanity forever, leaving us mortal to this day. According to Hawaiian tradition, Maui learned that the goddess Hina, his mother, was slowly aging. Mortified by her fading strength, he resolved to conquer death by crawling into the body of Hain Nui Te Po, the fearsome goddess of the underworld. This wasn't just a symbolic journey, it was a literal invasion. Maui believed that by entering her womb and exiting through her mouth, he could reverse the cycle of life and death. But the mission required absolute silence. As he transformed into a lizard and slithered inside, his companions, a chorus of small birds, were instructed not to utter a sound. The moment Maui disappeared into the goddess's body, however, the birds glimpsed her jagged obsidian teeth and razor-sharp fingernails. Overcome with terror, one of them burst into laughter. Hain Nui Te Po awoke with a start, her legs snapping shut like a vice, crushing Maui instantly. His death wasn't just tragic, it was final. Unlike other gods who might resurrect, Maui's demise became a hard boundary, proof that not even the cleverest deity could outwit mortality. What makes this myth so haunting isn't just the failure, but the implications. Some chants suggest Maui could have succeeded had his companions stayed quiet, meaning humanity's mortality hinges on a single moment of weakness. Carvings on ancient Hawaiian temple walls depict the scene with eerie detail. The goddess's body arched in fury, small birds frozen mid-flight, their beaks open in silent screams. Modern scholars note parallels to other Pacific myths where laughter breaks sacred taboos, as if the universe itself rejects immortality earned through deception. The most poignant legacy of Maui's folly lives on in Hawaiian funeral chants, which still reference his doomed quest. Elders whisper that when the wind rustles the leaves of certain sacred trees, it's Maui's voice still begging for a second chance. But the lesson endures. Some doors once closed stay closed, and perhaps that's the real wisdom buried in the tale. Not that death is a punishment, but that life's fleeting nature is what makes it precious. High in the Himalayan fortress of Samai Monastery, where prayer flags snap like celestial Morse code against the wind, a statue sits in the dim glow of butter lamps, its eyes not carved but watching. This is Peha, the Tibetan protector deity whose wooden effigies don't just symbolize divine presence, they allegedly embody it, shifting positions when no one's looking, whispering prophecies to select monks in the dead of night. But these aren't ghost stories whispered to frighten novices. They're meticulously documented phenomena woven into the fabric of Vajrayana Buddhism for over 1,000 years. Peha's origins trace back to a time before Buddhism took root in Tibet, when local spirits still ruled the mountains. Subdued by the great Guru Padmasambhava in the 8th century, Peha wasn't destroyed, he was converted, becoming a fierce guardian of the Dharma. His statues, often carved from black juniper wood with faces contorted in righteous fury, were installed in monasteries across Tibet, but the real mystery begins with what happened next. Chronicles from the time of the 5th Dalai Lama describe how Peha's primary statue at Nechung Monastery would sweat resin during times of national crisis, its wooden joints creaking as if straining to step down from its pedestal. Monks tasked with dressing the deity reported that robes, meticulously fitted the night before, would hang askew by dawn, as though the statue had moved when the temple lay empty. The rituals surrounding these statues are unlike anything in mainstream Buddhism. At Nechung, only a handful of trained monks called mediums or kyutin are permitted to approach Peha's effigy during ceremonies. When the chanting reaches a fever pitch and the scent of juniper incense thickens the air, these monks enter trance states, their voices dropping into guttural growls as they channel the deities' messages. 17th century Tibetan texts describe how statues would sometimes join the conversation, their carved lips remaining still while voices emanated from their chests. Skeptics dismiss these accounts as cultural theatrics, but historical records tell a stranger story. In 1789, when Gurkha invaders approached Lhasa, Pehar's statue at Samai reportedly toppled forward without human touch, its outstretched arm pointing southwest, the exact direction from which the attack came. Modern researchers have tried to unravel the phenomenon. In 2008, a team analyzing one of Pehar's smaller statues at Drepung Monastery noted unusually high electromagnetic readings near its base, along with faint vibrations detectable only through specialized equipment. Monks refused permission for invasive testing, but one elder quietly revealed that certain statues contain hollow chambers packed with ancient scrolls, herbs, and most intriguingly, what he called life stones, meteorite fragments believed to attract spiritual energy. Whether these materials interact in some unexplained way or serve as symbolic anchors for belief remains debated. The most compelling evidence, however, comes from the statues themselves. Unlike typical Buddhist icons, Pehar's effigies are deliberately carved with slightly loose joints, allowing subtle movement. During festivals, monks carefully reposition the statue's limbs only to find them reset days later. Security camera footage leaked from a Bhutanese temple in 2019 shows a Pehar statue's arm shifting position over 3 consecutive nights, always between 3:17 and 3:23 a.m., the traditional hour of the spirits. The footage was never officially verified, but the monks' reaction was telling. They didn't panic. They simply lit more lamps and recited the prayers for auspicious signs. Perhaps the true lesson lies not in proving whether the statues move, but in understanding why the tradition endures. In a world where the divine often feels distant, Pehar's restless presence offers something rare, a god who doesn't just listen but answers. And sometimes, when the wind howls through the Himalayan passes, those answers come in the unlikeliest of forms: a creak of ancient wood, a shift in shadows, or a whisper from lips that should never speak. The waves along Peru's coast still whisper his name, Viracocha, the bearded stranger who walked among the Inca, teaching secrets of civilization before vanishing into the western horizon. But this was no ordinary departure. According to Andean legends, the creator god didn't simply fade into myth. He strode across the Pacific surface like solid ground, his cloak billowing behind him as the sun swallowed his silhouette. What makes this disappearance so unsettling isn't just the imagery, it's how chillingly it aligns with Spanish chronicles written centuries later, describing a mysterious figure who appeared long before Columbus, a white-bearded man who spoke of a cross and vanished without a trace. The Inca revered Viracocha not just as a god, but as a flesh and blood teacher who emerged from Lake Titicaca during a time of chaos. He wore sandals, carried a staff, and performed miracles healing the sick, summoning springs from barren rock, before traversing the Andes, renaming valleys and peaks as he went. His final act was gathering his followers near the ocean, promising to return one day, then walking westward into the waves. Spanish friars recording these stories in the 16th century were stunned. Indigenous elders described Viracocha's appearance with uncanny precision. Pale skin, a flowing beard, robes resembling a monk's habit, details no native Andean would have invented, given their own sparse facial hair and traditional dress. The parallels grow stranger. A decade before Pizarro's conquest, Inca Emperor Huayna Capac received prophecies of bearded men arriving by sea, a warning so vivid he supposedly divided his empire to prepare for disaster. When the Spanish landed, their armor and horses matched descriptions of Viracocha's divine retinue, leading some Inca to initially welcome them as gods, a tragic miscalculation that historians argue hastened their downfall. Was this cultural memory or cosmic irony? Some scholars suggest Viracocha's legend absorbed fragments of pre-Incan encounters with Polynesian voyagers or even shipwrecked Europeans. Others point to the Tiwanaku ruins near Lake Titicaca, where carvings depict a figure with anomalous facial hair and headgear unlike any local tradition. The most haunting clue lies in the god's name itself. Viracocha may derive from the Quechua words for sea foam, a poetic nod to his disappearance into the waves. Yet 16th century manuscripts claim indigenous people applied the same title to the Spanish friars, as if recognizing some eerie continuity. Modern archaeologists have found evidence of coastal rituals where offerings were cast into the Pacific, always facing the setting sun as though calling someone back. What lingers isn't just the question of who or what Viracocha was, but why his promise of return held such power. The Inca, masters of an empire spanning mountains and jungles, preserved this story with urgent fidelity. Perhaps they understood something we've forgotten, that gods don't vanish without reason. Sometimes they're waiting, and sometimes the sea isn't just water, it's a doorway. Now shift your gaze north to where the desert meets the jungle, and another deity's disappearance takes an even darker turn. The Aztec Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, didn't fade gracefully into legend. He engineered his own erasure. This trickster god of fate and night wielded a blade of obsidian, using it not just to cut flesh, but to slice through reality itself, his most infamous act. Shattering his own likeness, leaving only fragments across temples and battlefields, forcing humanity to grapple with a truth as sharp as volcanic glass. Some gods refused to be known completely. Murals at Teotihuacan depict Tezcatlipoca stepping into his own reflection, his body fracturing into countless shards that rain down as jaguars, stars, and weapons. Unlike Viracocha's solemn departure, this was deliberate chaos, a god scattering himself to remain omnipresent yet ungraspable. Spanish chronicles describe Aztec priests keeping broken mirrors in sacred chests, each sliver representing a facet of his will. When conquistadors demanded gold, priests allegedly handed them these fragments instead, whispering that the true treasure was seeing what could never be held. Modern excavations reveal how deeply this ideology permeated Aztec society. At Templo Maya, archaeologists uncovered a trove of shattered mirrors arranged in spirals, their edges blackened as if burned during rituals. Spectral analysis showed some fragments originated hundreds of miles apart, suggesting they were carried across Mesoamerica like divine puzzle pieces no one could reassemble. The message was clear: Tezcatlipoca's power lay in his absence. Where other gods demanded idols, he wanted only echoes. The chilling brilliance of this myth isn't just its symbolism, it's the psychological insight. By refusing form, Tezcatlipoca forced his worshippers to confront uncertainty itself. Every cracked mirror, every splintered bone flute used in his rituals became a lesson. Divinity isn't something you capture. It's the void that stares back when you dare to look. So while Viracocha's disappearance teases with the possibility of return, Tezcatlipoca's vanishing act offers no such comfort. Some gods leave breadcrumbs across the waves, others scatter knives in the dark and dare you to walk forward. The scorching winds of the Levant didn't just bring heat, they carried whispers of a god locked in an endless struggle against his own extinction. In the ancient city of Ugarit, clay tablets etched with wedge-shaped script tell of Baal, the tempestuous storm god whose annual duel with Mot, the personification of death, wasn't just a myth. It was a chilling allegory for the brutal dance between life and decay that defined Canaanite existence. Each summer, as crops withered and rivers ran dry, the people watched the skies with mounting dread, knowing their thunderous protector had once again fallen to the underworld's grasp. The Ugaritic texts describe Baal's descent with visceral detail, his roar fading from the clouds, his sacred mountain left deserted, his sister Anat's grief so explosive she carved through armies like wheat to retrieve his corpse. But this wasn't a permanent defeat. Like clockwork, Baal would rise again after 7 years, his resurrection heralded by thunderstorms that shattered the silence of drought. Modern scholars recognize this cycle as a mirror of the agricultural year, where the autumn rains symbolized divine revival, yet the tablets hint at something darker. Baal's battles weren't just seasonal markers, they were cosmic maintenance. Without his yearly death, the world would stagnate. Without his return, it would perish. Archaeology adds startling layers to this narrative. At Ras Shamra, the ruins of Ugarit, altars have been found stained with traces of barley and wine offerings to coax Baal back from Mot's gullet. Even more revealing are the child-sized graves nearby, their bones arranged in fetal positions as if awaiting rebirth. Some researchers link these to harrowing passages in the texts where Baal's followers enact symbolic deaths and resurrections, blurring the line between ritual and reality. The most haunting artifact, a shattered statue of Baal, intentionally broken and repaired annually, its cracks filled with gold, a physical metaphor for cyclical breaking and healing. What unsettles contemporary readers isn't the violence of the myth, but its raw honesty about dependency. The Canaanites didn't just worship Baal, they needed him in the same way a drowning man needs air. His victories weren't guaranteed. The tablets stress that even gods gamble and fate's scales could tip either way. When excavations at Megiddo uncovered a library of omens, animal bones scorched with questions like, "Will Baal prevail this year?" It revealed a people perpetually braced between hope and despair. The brilliance of Baal's story lies in its refusal to soften the truth. Other cultures celebrated eternal gods, but the Canaanites embraced a deity as fragile as the rain itself. His power wasn't in invincibility, but in resilience. Every autumn, when the first drops hit the parched earth, it wasn't just water falling, it was proof that even death could be temporary. And perhaps that's why his cult endured for millennia, not because he promised certainty, but because he embodied the most human of faiths. The kind that keeps waiting, season after season, for a sign that the darkness won't last forever. Izanagi stood at the mouth of Yomi, the shadowy underworld where spirits whispered through the roots of ancient trees. He had come to retrieve his beloved Izanami, the goddess who had shaped the islands of Japan alongside him, until her fiery death in childbirth stole her from the land of the living. The air smelled of damp earth and something older, something decayed, as he called her name into the darkness. Her voice answered, faint but familiar, promising reunion if he obeyed one sacred rule: do not look upon her face until they had escaped Yomi's grasp. A simple request, a fatal mistake waiting to happen. The myths describe Izanagi's patience unraveling like a frayed rope. At first, he waited in the blackness, listening to Izanami's shuffling footsteps as she negotiated with the underworld's keepers for her release. But time dripped like wax in Yomi, meaningless and thick. Doubt gnawed at him. Was it truly her voice or a trick of the hungry dead? Compulsion overtook caution. Breaking his promise, he struck a spark from his comb, a fleeting burst of flame that illuminated the horror before him. Izanami's once radiant body was a grotesque tapestry of rot, her flesh sagging from bone, her hair alive with maggots. The shock of that sight did more than break the taboo, it shattered the fragile possibility of return. What followed wasn't just a chase through the underworld, it was a divine tantrum that redefined mortality. Enraged by his betrayal, Izanami unleashed the 8 thunders and an army of Shikome, corpse women with claws like rusted nails, to drag him back into the dark. Izanagi fled, blocking Yomi's entrance with a boulder so massive even the gods couldn't move it. From opposite sides of the stone, their final exchange echoed across the ages. Izanami swore she would strangle 1,000 living souls each day to punish his cowardice. He vowed to create 1,500 births in retaliation, and so the balance between life and death was set not through harmony but through spite. The brilliance of this myth lies in its unsettling realism. Unlike other underworld tales where love conquers all, Izanagi's failure feels painfully human. His glance wasn't just curiosity, it was the inevitable collapse of trust in the face of the unknown. Scholars point to ancient burial practices as proof of the story's cultural weight. Excavations of early Japanese tombs reveal corpses carefully positioned face down, as if to prevent the dead from meeting the living's gaze, a direct echo of Izanami's taboo. Even the word for corpse in Old Japanese, shishi, carries connotations of something taboo, something that must not be seen. But the most chilling legacy lives on in Shinto purification rituals. After escaping Yomi, Izanagi washed himself in a river, and from the droplets clinging to his body, new gods sprang forth: Amaterasu from his left eye, Tsukuyomi from his right, Susanoo from his nose. This wasn't just rebirth, it was contamination transformed. Modern misogi ceremonies, where worshippers stand under icy waterfalls, reenact this cleansing, scrubbing away not just dirt but the lingering stain of death's knowledge. The lesson is clear: some truths once seen cannot be unseen, and the best we can do is keep moving forward, creating life from the wreckage of what we've witnessed. Perhaps that's why Izanagi's story endures. It doesn't offer comfort. It offers a warning that love, no matter how fierce, bumps against the hard edges of fear. And sometimes the only thing left is to block the cave and let the darkness keep its secrets. The words fell into the sea like stones, each syllable a spark of ancient magic swallowed by the waves. In the Finnish epic Kalevala, the sage Vainamarainen didn't just misplace a few spells. He dropped an entire trove of sacred knowledge overboard during a storm, watching helplessly as the waters claimed them. This wasn't a simple accident, it was a cosmic turning point, the moment when humanity's connection to the old magic frayed, leaving them to navigate the world with nothing but their own wits and will. Vainamarainen's loss cuts deeper than a forgotten incantation. As the eternal bard, his very voice shaped reality. With songs, he could build boats from thought, heal wounds with a single stanza, even stop the sun in its tracks. But the Kalevala describes his fatal lapse with haunting clarity. Aboard a desperate voyage to secure a powerful artifact, a tempest rocks his vessel, and the pouch holding his most potent spells slips from his belt. The waves don't just steal the words, they dissolve them, as if the sea itself refused to give back what belonged to the land. From that day forward, the epic tells us magic grew quieter. Spells that once moved mountains now barely stirred the wind. Archaeologists studying Baltic folklore note eerie parallels between this myth and real historical shifts. Rune stones along Finland's coast depict symbols that grow simpler over time, as if the carver's understanding of their power had faded. Charms excavated from medieval Finnish graves show layers of wear, suggesting repeated use and dwindling effect. Even the kantele, Vainamarainen's harp-like instrument said to enchant all who heard it, survives in folk traditions, but modern players admit its melodies no longer bind the forest to your will, as the epics claim. What makes this story so unsettling is its implication that magic didn't vanish because the gods withdrew it, but because humanity fumbled it away. The Kalevala hints that Vainamarainen's loss wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Later verses describe shamans straining to hear the old songs in the rustling leaves, catching only fragments. By the time Christianity arrived in Finland, the transition from a world alive with spells to one governed by prayer felt less like conquest and more like confirmation. The magic had already been leaking out, drop by drop, since the day the sage let go. Yet the myth leaves one thread dangling, a hope buried in the epic's final lines. Vainamarainen doesn't die, he sails westward in a copper boat, vowing to return when he's needed most. Folk artists still paint his silhouette on the horizon, a shadow just beyond the waves. Maybe the lost words aren't truly gone. Maybe they're waiting, like seeds in the seabed, for someone to dive deep enough to bring them back. Until then, the Kalevala whispers a lesson as old as the first spell. Knowledge is never just given, it's held or it's lost, and some gaps never fully closed. The story of Vainamoranen's lost words isn't an isolated tragedy. It's part of a haunting pattern woven through global mythology, a recurring theme of divine knowledge slipping through humanity's grasp. From the Norse god Odin sacrificing an eye for wisdom only to see Ragnarök erase the gods, to the Babylonian hero Adapa refusing the gift of immortality because he was tricked into thinking it was poison, cultures worldwide whisper the same uneasy truth. The greatest secrets are often just beyond reach, either by design or by our own stumbling. Take the Greek legend of Prometheus, who defied the gods to bring fire, and with it technology to humankind. His punishment wasn't just eternal torment, it was the unspoken implication that fire alone wasn't enough. The true cost of progress was the loss of direct communion with the divine. Similarly, in Egyptian lore, Thoth inscribed the universe's secrets onto emerald tablets, but only fragments survived, scattered and misinterpreted. Even the biblical story of Eden carries this thread, an entire world of understanding locked away after one fatal choice. What makes these myths so chilling isn't the loss itself, but the lingering question: was the withdrawal of knowledge a punishment, a test, or a mercy? Archaeology offers unsettling glimpses of this collective yearning. In Mesopotamia, libraries like Ashurbanipal's boasted thousands of cuneiform tablets, yet their catalogues reference even older texts now lost to time. Medieval alchemists burned lifetimes encoding recipes for transmutation in deliberately obscure symbols, as if guarding wisdom too potent for the unprepared. Even Viking runestones often include deliberate errors, as though their carvers feared the true meanings might unleash chaos if used carelessly. The pattern is undeniable. Humanity's relationship with divine knowledge has always been one of glimpses and gaps, of near misses and almost understandings. Yet there's a curious twist to this pattern. Many myths don't end with total loss, they hint at recovery. The Celts spoke of the lost book of the Druids, hidden in otherworldly mounds until the world proves worthy. Indigenous Australian songlines describe ancestral knowledge asleep in the land, waiting for the right voices to wake it. Even Vainamoranen's departure carries this hope. His copper boat wasn't a coffin but a vessel, implying eventual return. Perhaps the deepest wisdom these stories offer isn't about absence, but patience, the idea that what's lost may not be gone forever, just waiting for the right moment to resurface. The most provocative clue lies in how these myths shape behavior. From Finnish shamans memorizing epic verses to Jewish scribes meticulously copying Torah scrolls letter by letter, cultures invest extraordinary effort into preserving what fragments remain. It's as if the act of remembering itself becomes a kind of defiance, a refusal to let the dark swallow everything. Modern science echoes this instinct, with researchers today scrambling to record dying languages or digitize crumbling manuscripts before they vanish. The drive isn't just sentimental, it's almost instinctual, as though we sense that somewhere in the fragments, the keys to something greater might still lie hidden. So was Vainamoranen's loss a warning or a challenge? Maybe both. The sea that took his spells still laps at every shore, whispering that what's lost can sometimes be found again, not in grand revelations, but in the quiet persistence of those who keep searching, keep singing, keep believing that the old magic isn't truly gone. It's just waiting for the right hands to gather it back up, drop by precious drop. For centuries, scholars dismissed the idea of intoxicating vapors rising beneath the temple of Apollo as superstitious folklore until the ground itself began to confess its secrets. In the late 1990s, geologist Gel de Boer stumbled upon something extraordinary while surveying Delphi's fault lines. Two intersecting fractures directly beneath the temple's ruins, still seeping traces of ethylene, a sweet-scented hydrocarbon known to induce trance-like states. Suddenly, the Pythia's frenzied prophecies weren't just poetic license, they were chemistry in action. But here's where modern science collides with ancient mystery. While ethylene explains the oracle's altered consciousness, it doesn't account for the chilling accuracy of certain prophecies. Take the case of King Croesus of Lydia, who was told that if he attacked Persia, a great empire would fall. He assumed it meant his enemies, only to watch his own kingdom crumble. Recent excavations uncovered something startling near the temple's Aditon, a network of hidden channels where priests could have eavesdropped on visitors' private anxieties before consultations. Combine that with Etheline's truth serum effect, and suddenly, the oracle's insights seem less like divine vision and more like psychological warfare. The real revelation came in 2018, when archaeologists using ground-penetrating radar found a previously unknown chamber beneath the temple floor, a cramped space lined with lead tablets inscribed with names, dates, and events. Were these meticulous records of past prophecies cross-referenced to enhance future predictions, or something darker, a curated archive of political secrets leveraged to steer the course of empires? Yet for all these discoveries, one enigma remains. The same ethylene concentrations that induce euphoria at low doses can be fatal at higher levels. How did the Pythia survive decades of exposure? A clay cup unearthed in 2021 holds a clue residue of oleander and bay leaf, plants ancient texts describe as the god's antidote. Was the oracle's ritual more than just inhalation? Did she sip a protective brew, calibrating intoxication like a surgeon balancing poison and cure? The most haunting find isn't an artifact but an absence. Despite centuries of excavation, no one has located the Pythia's bones. Local legends claim the last oracle, confronted by Roman soldiers in the 4th century, vanished into the same fissure that once fueled her visions. Geologists confirm the fault remains active, its gases still bubbling up through nearby springs. Perhaps the real prophecy was always in the earth itself, a reminder that some truths rise unpredictable as vapor, only to dissipate before we grasp them fully. From the Aztec feathered serpent vanishing with a prophecy unfulfilled, to Egypt's sun god surrendering his true name in agony, these ancient stories share an uncanny rhythm. Deities who don't just depart but dissolve into riddles, their exits as calculated as their arrivals. Whether it's Izanagi's fatal glance at death's corruption or the Norse gods marching knowingly toward Ragnarök, the pattern is unmistakable. Divine disappearances are never accidents. They're lessons in disguise. The Maize god's body sprouts harvests from his bones. The Inuit Sedna's severed fingers become sea creatures. Even the Morrigan's riverbank laments blur the line between omen and opportunity, as if the gods designed their exits to keep humanity leaning forward, searching for meaning in the emptiness they left behind. What unites these tales isn't just mystery, it's intentional incompleteness. Like a mirror shattered by Tezcatlipoca, the fragments invite us to piece together truths too vast for any single culture to hold. The Sumerian Anunnaki's abrupt exodus mirrors Viracocha's stride across the Pacific, both hinting at gods who treat their presence as temporary gifts or tests. And when the Finnish Väinämöinen lets his songs sink into the sea, or the Pythia's voice fades with Delphi's fissures, we're left wondering, was the loss of divine knowledge truly inevitable, or did the gods entrust us with gaps because they knew we'd never stop trying to fill them? Perhaps the most haunting thread is the cyclical nature of these vanishings. Baldur dies yearly to bring rain, the Morrigan mourns battles before they're fought. Even Pehar's restless statues defy linear time, their movements whispering that divinity isn't bound by human clocks. These aren't endings, they're pauses, as if the gods folded themselves into the world's fabric, waiting to be glimpsed in solstice shadows or the ripple of a storm-lit river. So which disappearance lingers in your thoughts? The Maori trickster Maui, whose quest for immortality ended in a goddess's teeth, or Amaterasu, whose grief nearly unraveled the world until laughter lured her back? Share your pick below, and remember, every myth left unfinished is an invitation to keep listening, because the oldest stories aren't just told, they're waiting.